I'm Teresa.
And I'm Callista, and this is Terrifyingly Typical True Crime. And we're going back to talking about TV shows this week because we are currently, I think, like halfway through The Beast and Me, and we just have to comment on Claire Danes and Matthew Rhys.
They're great. I feel like we start a lot of shows, and everybody's got, there's lots of people that like reality shows, and you do you. But I feel like because maybe there's so many, we're a little bit picky, but Matthew Rhys and Claire Danes are just, I can't think of anything that they've been in that they're not good.
Yeah.
And seeing him as like, the wealthy, did he do it? Did he not do it? Kind of criminal, I guess we'll say, we're assuming, and she always does so well with, like, the conflicted, lots of shit has happened in the past, how she's, either dealing with stuff in the present or not dealing with stuff. She's just so good, and it always makes me think of Homeland. So good.
Yeah, she's so good. Yeah, she was so good in Homeland. Matthew Rhys was so good in The Americans. Yeah, I think they must just be like obviously feeding off each other because they're both just really freaking good.
Yeah, I agree, and obviously, it makes an actor can only do so much. A lot of it is the writing, but I just feel like it's intelligent. I like when that's gonna sound weird, but you're watching something obviously, you're watching something, but it's not, like, stylized or, like, all these things that distract from the story. You know what does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I feel like yeah, I understand what you're saying. Yeah, I know it seems like a lot of more recent shows are very stylized. And it's like that's in lieu of like good writing and acting, and it's like that doesn't make up for it.
Right. Yeah, I feel like when we start something and like I know what the next line is gonna be, I'm like, "Okay, that's not great," you know? I
Yeah.
mean, yeah. Anyways, I think it's good. So I'll be curious what happens.
Yeah, I think it gets really engaging and interesting, and you want to know what happens next. Yeah, we don't really binge shows, but we normally watch like one a week. Harkening back to the days when we used to have to wait a week to watch shows. But yeah, we've been watching like two a week because they're good.
They are good. That always makes me think, was it like at the end? I'm gonna date myself, but like shows would end, on regular TV before we had all the streaming, NBC, CBS, whatever. They would end in May, and you would have to wait until September to see, oh my God, how the cliffhanger, resolves itself.
Yeah, I'm not sure how you're dating yourself. I was alive for that for years.
Okay, you were young. You were young though.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah. Anything else?
I don't think so.
Alrighty, let's get into the episode. Today, we are continuing our theme of 90s serial killers who targeted gay men. Today, we're traveling to the Midwest to talk about Indiana's most notorious serial killer, Herb Baumeister, who was able to avoid suspicion for years until a brave survivor chose to speak and the bones of Herb's victims could no longer be concealed. People around Westfield, Indiana, a suburb north of Indianapolis, knew Herb Baumeister as a wealthy business and family man. He owned a large Tudor mansion on 18 acres, which he christened Box Hollow Farm because people with money like to name their possessions.
Is it even a property worth being jealous of if it doesn't have a name?
Probably not.
This is true.
But as in most true crime cases, outwardly appearances aren't always what they seem. Herb had a secret life. Lucky for him, his wife Julie and their three kids would often travel to the lakeside condo about 100 miles from their home, owned by Herb's mother, Elizabeth. Julie assumed Herb was working during their absence, as you would. Not that he was traveling to nearby Indianapolis to cruise gay bars, pick up young, unsuspecting men, and bring them back to their family home, engage in consensual sex, talk his victims into erotic asphyxiation, strangle them to death, then bury their bodies throughout his sprawling property.
Herb had known he was gay from the time he was young. But being born in 1947 and growing up in a conservative family in Indiana's Bible Belt, Herb hid his sexuality and did what was expected. He married his wife, Juliana, who went by Julie, Sater in 1971, and had three children. But as with most secrets, when we hide who we are, it never really stays hidden. Herb was born in Indianapolis on April 7th, 1947, to Herbert Eugene Baumeister, an anesthesiologist, and his wife Elizabeth, a homemaker. Herb was the oldest of four children, and his early childhood was normal and uneventful. Herbert Sr.'s career as a doctor provided a comfortable life for the Baumeister children. Herb attended North Central High School, and this is when his concerning behavior began to show. He tried hard to fit in, but his morbid sense of humor, from finding a dead crow, picking it up, and carrying it all the way to school and then placing it on a teacher's desk, to displaying traits of urophilia and wondering out loud what urine tasted like, made this impossible. These incidents caused Herb's classmates to give him a wide berth. When Herb's behavior became disruptive and he urinated on the desk of the same teacher he had targeted with the crow, the teacher contacted Herb's parents. Herb's father thought a psychiatric evaluation was necessary. Herb was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, and because this was the 1960s, labeling someone as a paranoid schizophrenic was a valid diagnosis. This is now an outdated classification, and rather than being shoved into a subcategory, people are diagnosed with the broader term of schizophrenia. But the change in diagnosis didn't go into effect until the fifth edition of the DSM, or Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, was published in 2013. Herb was also diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder. Unfortunately for Herb and the people around him, he did not receive treatment for either diagnosis, which makes you wonder why his father bothered having an evaluation done in the first place. Treatment with antipsychotic drugs was becoming more popular in the mid 1960s, and as a doctor, his father would have been aware of this. Though institutionalization and, frighteningly, lobotomies were less common, they were still utilized at this time.
Herb graduated high school in 1965 and began attending Indiana University in Bloomington, about an hour outside of Indianapolis. However, that wasn't a good fit, so he dropped out after one semester. Shortly after Herb and Julie's wedding in May 1972, Herb's father had him committed to a psychiatric hospital for 2 months due to severe depression. 1 month after his release, he enrolled at Butler University in Indianapolis, but again only lasted one semester. Herb's father helped him get a job as a copy boy at the Indy Star newspaper. Herb was eager to fit in with his colleagues, but soon resented having a low level position. Herb quit the paper and bounced around various jobs until he got a job at the Indiana Bureau of Motor Vehicles in 1974. Herb's initial quirky and weird behavior gave way to him becoming domineering and aggressive, but because this was the late 70s and early 80s and he was a white man, he was promoted several times, securing the position of program director. However, when it was found out that he had urinated on his manager's desk, reportedly on a letter addressed to then Governor Robert Orr, he was terminated in 1985.
Although I'm not sure it's listed, you would imagine that would be a fireable offense.
I mean, that's a real specific and real weird thing to do. After his termination, he worked a few odd jobs, including as a traveling salesman, and then began working at a thrift store, where he felt that if he owned his own thrift store, he would definitely do a better job. In 1988, Herb borrowed money from his mother. His father had died in 1986, and started the Save, without an E, a lot thrift store. This venture was successful, at least in the beginning, and made the Baumeisters wealthy.
In 1991, Herb, Julie, and the kids moved to their dream home, Fox Hollow Farm. Herb liked the status of owning a large home with property in the Tony area of Westfield. However, he wasn't interested in actually maintaining the grounds of the property, allowing weeds to become overgrown and not clearing any debris that would accumulate from the treed acreage. The only part of the home that Herb was really interested in was the indoor pool. Herb, obviously not a reader of Architectural Digest, made the questionable design choice of placing mannequins dressed in beachy garb, including lifeguard attire, around the pool area to make it look like the mannequins were having a pool party. With the first location of their Save a Lot thrift store doing well, the Baumeisters opened another thrift store. But the second location would not be as successful as the first. Herb continued to buy inventory, storing the overflow at home, even though sales were dwindling. Julie, who was involved in the business, tried to talk to Herb about his excessive buying, but he didn't listen. By the summer of 1993, employees began to notice Herb's increased volatility and long absences from work. Additionally, the Save with an E, a lot grocery store chain, whose business was founded in 1977, had filed a lawsuit over the very similar name, and the thrift stores began to suffer. Herb and Julie's marriage was also deteriorating, and Julie and the kids spent as much time away from home as they could, leaving Herb alone and left to his own devices.
In December of 1993, Herb's teenage son Eric, while outside exploring Fox Hollow's grounds, came across a truly disturbing sight. He saw what looked like a human skull. Hightailing it back to the house, he told his mom what he had found. A little skeptical and hoping her son was wrong, Julie followed Eric to where he found what looked like a skull. Sure enough, Eric was right. Julie moved some leaves and small twigs and found more bones. She and Eric left what they had found and returned to the house. Later that night, Julie told Herb about the gruesome discovery. Herb brushed any concerns away and gave a mind boggling reason for the bones on their property. Herb explained that he had found a medical model skeleton in his father's garage when he was cleaning it out. Fun fact, apparently, real human bones were used for medical skeletons until the late 1980s.
Wow.
Yeah, I would have expected that to be not a thing way
Yeah.
earlier. His father, being a doctor, had a tendency to collect and keep things. As CC and the Music Factory sang, things that make you go, because why would he move bones from his father's garage to his property? Julie initially chose to believe her husband of over 20 years, or at least not question this lame ass explanation. While Herb's life was beginning to unravel, Indianapolis was experiencing a slew of missing men. The police didn't seem interested in looking too closely at these missing men or if they could be connected. The men were gay, and I guess that made them less human in the eyes of the conservative police department. In June of 1994, Alan Wayne Brossard, 27, went missing. His mother contacted the police department, but they told her he was an adult and he probably left Indianapolis to live somewhere else where his alternative lifestyle would be more accepted. She was disgusted with the police's unconcerned attitude and called private investigator and former sheriff Virgil Vandegrift.
Good on her.
Yeah,
Cell phones were rare, and credit card tracking was not nearly as sophisticated as it is now. So, Virgil and his investigator, Bill Hillsley, took to the streets, posting flyers near Indianapolis gay bars and talking to bartenders and patrons. When Virgil's investigator picked up the gay lifestyle magazine, The Indiana Word, and read an article about the 1993 disappearance of 31-year-old Jeff Jones, Virgil feared these two missing men may be connected. Virgil had only been on Alan's case for a few weeks when he was contacted by another mother, whose son, 33-year-old Roger Allen Goodlett, was missing. Roger's mother had also gotten nowhere with the police. Virgil believed the cases were linked and that Indianapolis may have a serial killer in their midst. Bill found that most of the people he talked to were scared and too afraid to share any information they may have had. He did learn from a person who wanted to remain anonymous that he had seen Roger get into a light blue car with an Ohio license plate outside of the bar, Our Place. He wasn't, however, able to give more than a vague description of who Roger left the bar with. While trying to puzzle the pieces of the case together, Virgil received a call from Mark Goodyear, and Mark had quite the story to tell. He had seen the flyers around town with pictures of Alan and Roger. He knew Roger from hanging out at the same bars. Mark said that he had been with a man who he thought could be a serial killer. He had contacted the police about what had happened, but they acted like he was crazy or had been in a drug fueled haze and didn't believe him. Mark said he had seen a tall, lanky, brown haired man at the 501 Club in August who kept looking at the missing flyer of Roger that was behind the bar. Having a spine of steel, Mark went up to the bar and struck up a conversation with the man who said his name was Brian Smart. Mark tried asking Brian if he recognized Roger or if he had ever seen him. Brian evaded answering any questions and instead invited Mark to the house he was staying at. Brian said he was a landscape artist from Ohio and he was staying at the home of the owners while they were out of town. He said there was a big indoor swimming pool and they could have a drink and go for a swim. Mark reluctantly agreed, thinking, I'm way bigger than this guy, and if there's an issue, I could take him.
Brian led Mark out of the bar to his blue Buick. They started driving north out of the city. Mark was getting a little apprehensive of where they were going. He wasn't familiar with the area, but Brian assured him that they were headed in the right direction. The house was on some acreage, so it was out of town. Mark noticed that they were definitely driving in a nice area with expensive homes. Brian pulled off the road and Mark glimpsed a sign at the entrance that had the word farm on it. They drove down a long, curvy driveway and parked in front of a large Tudor style house. They got out of the car and Brian ushered Mark to a door at the side. Mark followed Brian through the dark house, down some stairs to a large indoor pool. The pool area was surrounded by mannequins, which Mark thought was weird but didn't say anything. Brian volunteered that it can get lonely down here and they keep me company. Did he bring the mannequins with him from Ohio? The alarm bells are like a hurricane warning in my head, loud and persistent.
I'm in no way blaming Mark, but it's such a creepy thing to say if he said, I brought the mannequins to add to my landscapes. That's one thing. But because they're good company,
I mean, maybe he was like Bella when Paul said, "You're good with weird," and just went with it.
that's great. And to be fair, I guess everyone's weird in their own way, so we all look past what could be red flags.
That's true. Brian offered Mark a drink, but he declined, thankfully, because I am sure he would have put some type of sedative in there.
Oh, no doubt.
Mark saw a look of irritation pass over Brian, but the mask was quickly back in place. Brian told Mark that he wanted to erotically asphyxiate him. Mark, having no idea he was in immediate danger, agreed. He sat on the pool step and Brian sat behind him. Brian began to asphyxiate him with a hose. It soon felt like this was more than a fun sexual experience and that Brian was really trying to strangle him. Mark, having all his faculties, pretended to pass out. Brian pulled him out of the pool and was leaning over him, asking him if he was okay when Mark woke up. Brian seemed shocked that Mark was okay, but recovered his composure quickly. Maybe because Mark was larger than Brian, he was able to convince him to drive him back to the bar. Brian praised Mark and said he was a good sport and had been fun to play with.
It's like he sees him as nothing more than one of his weird ass mannequins.
It is like that. Mark is the only known survivor who went to Fox Hollow Farm and lived to tell what happened.
Virgil and Bill, now armed with a name, went back to the various gay bars hoping someone had met Brian Smart, but no one had. The trail went cold and there were no more disappearances for a while. Virgil tried to get as much information as he could about where Brian had taken Mark. Mark again mentioned that the property had the word farm in the name and that there was a long, curvy driveway with a Tudor house sitting far back from the road. Virgil obtained aerial photos of large properties about 20 miles outside of Indianapolis and settled on Westfield, where there were numerous horse properties with acreage and nice homes. Virgil showed the photos to Mark and Bill, and they narrowed in on a few that looked like what Mark remembered from that horrific night. Bill had been a state trooper and was very familiar with the highways in and around Indianapolis. So he drove out to the sprawling properties in Westfield and looked at several houses that seemed promising from the photos. But they didn't match Mark's description. Finally, Bill came to a sign at the end of a long driveway marked Fox Hollow Farm. Hoping this could be the house, he tentatively drove down the curvy driveway and noticed the overgrown grounds that ended with a large Tudor style home. Lucky for him, it didn't look like anyone was home, so he parked his car and began looking through large windows. At the back of the house, he smelled the pungent odor of chlorine and peered into one of the windows and saw a large indoor pool with mannequins posed around the room.
Virgil looked up the property tax records and learned that the person paying taxes on the property was Herb Baumeister. Virgil went to the police with the information they gathered, but the police, first, couldn't believe Herb could be involved in any of the missing gay men. After all, he was a respected businessman and was married with children. Second, they simply did not have enough evidence to question Herb. Virgil, not content to sit idly by, remembered the article he had read in the Indiana Word and investigator Mary Wilson's investigation into missing Jeff Jones. Virgil, with Mark in tow and armed with the information they had, went to see Mary. Mary had worked sex crimes before being transferred to missing persons, so she realized more than most the effort people would go to hide their sexual proclivities, from consensual kink to sexual assault. Mary, still the principal investigator in the Jeff Jones disappearance, was also investigating the disappearances of Richard Hamilton, 20, and John Bayer, 21. Mary thought Mark could be the missing link in the investigation and the person that could tie all of the information together. Knowing the police needed more information to question Herb/Brian, Mark was not going to give up and continued to frequent the bar where he had met Brian. Luckily, Mark's perseverance paid off. On August 29th, 1995, Mark spotted Brian and began talking with him. Brian seemed a little nervous, and they only chatted for a short time before Brian left. Mark casually followed Brian towards the door and wrote down the license plate of the vehicle, a blue Buick, the same car that Mark had been a passenger in a little over a year earlier.
If only we could have replaced the officers on the police force who didn't even want to look in Herb's direction with Mark.
I know, he's done a lot of legwork, a lot.
Really, all the legwork.
Yeah, really all of it. On November 1st, Mary and her boss, Lieutenant Thomas Green, approached Herb while he was at work at the original Save-A-Lot store. Mary told Herb why they were there and that they were investigating the disappearances of several men and they wanted to search his home. Herb refused their request and told them any further communication would need to go through his attorney. Not to be outdone, Mary went to Fox Hollow Farms and approached Julie, who, as co owner of the home, could allow a search of the property. Julie refused, saying she had talked to her husband and he had already told her that he was being falsely accused of theft. Mary told her the real reason that they wanted to search the home and the property. Julie, shocked and in disbelief, was adamant that there was nothing to inspect on her property and refused to let the police look around. Before leaving, Mary left her card with Julie and told her to call her if she changed her mind.
Mary didn't think Julie knew of Herb's supposed dark double life. She wouldn't be the first or last to choose to believe their husband's lies. Mary tried to get a search warrant through Hamilton County, where Fox Hollow Farm was located, but the county wasn't initially interested in searching a law abiding citizen's property, especially when the missing men came from Indianapolis, which was out of their jurisdiction. It was just another example of the police putting territory and politics before their actual job of catching criminals. Thankfully, Julie's unease regarding her husband had only grown since the visit from the police, and Herb's weird and erratic behavior in the last 6 months was causing her to doubt some of his comments. So she filed for divorce in January of 1996. On June 23rd, 1996, Julie called her attorney, Bill Wendling, and asked him to contact Mary. She wanted to tell her about the bones Eric had found on the property, and since Herb was out of town with Eric, visiting his mother's lake house, it was the perfect time to allow investigators to search the property. The following day, Mary, along with Hamilton County Captain Tom Anderson and County Sheriff's Office Detective Jeff Markham, headed to the Baumeister property. The men were extremely skeptical that they were going to find anything. And if they did find any bones, they were pretty sure they would be animal and not human. The men decided they would humor Mary, certain it would be a waste of time.
I'm sure they thought that Mary was overreacting.
Just another hysterical woman. Don't look too closely at her job.
Yeah, no way she could actually be right.
Of course not. Julie and her attorney led the law enforcement officials to the location where she and Eric had found the bones. Initially disbelieving, the officials moved a section of the leaves and twigs with their feet and saw what looked like pebbles. However, upon closer inspection, the pebbles appeared to be bone fragments and human teeth. Carefully placing some of the material in an evidence bag, Mary took the bag to forensic anthropologist Stephen Narrock at the University of Indiana, who quickly confirmed what Mary had known all along. They're human, they're recent, and they've been burned. Police returned to Fox Hollow Farm to what now appeared to be Herb's homemade graveyard and what was shaping up to be one of the worst crimes in Indiana's history.
Numerous investigators, assistants, and an anthropological team began the arduous task of carefully combing through the property, beginning with where bone fragments had been initially located. They began by placing small orange flags anywhere where a bone fragment appeared. After an hour, more than 100 flags had been placed. One investigator said it looked like a mass disaster scene, similar to what is seen after a plane crash. While the outside work was just beginning, officers entered the Baumeister home. Downstairs, in the daylight basement, they found mannequins, a wet bar, and the pool, just as Mark had described. They also found something they weren't expecting, a poorly hidden video camera that police suspected Herb had used to record the murders. Julie was anxious about the safety of Eric and the lengths Herb might resort to if he found out what was happening back at home. Julie's attorney was able to have a judge sign off on custody documents and file a child custody order that would allow the sheriff's office to remove Eric without tipping Herb off about what was going on at his property. Unbelievably, there wasn't enough evidence at this point to arrest Herb. Sheriffs went to the lake house, and though Herb was initially hesitant to allow law enforcement to take Eric, he assumed this was some type of ploy to allow Julie to have custody of all the children in the pending divorce. Herb relented, and they were able to remove Eric without incident.
Meanwhile, the excavations of the property were just getting started. About 60 volunteers, mostly off duty policemen and firemen, spent hours carefully searching the property. They found numerous compost piles where it appeared that Herb had put leaves, debris, and trash on top of the bodies and burned them, with the assumption that they would decompose beyond recognition in the slim chance they were ever found. Only a few days after the search had begun, more than 5,500 bones, teeth, and bone fragments had been found. Neighbors from the adjacent farm informed investigators that they had found bones in a drainage ditch that separated the two properties. These remains were more intact, with human ribs and vertebrae visible and protruding from the mud. With investigators just beginning to uncover the depravity that had transpired on the Baumeister property, the question arose about how Julie could have been unaware of her husband's actions. One of our sources for this episode made, in our opinion, an unfair judgment about Julie, insisting that because the family had stability and wealth, she simply ignored any questionable behavior from her husband. But Julie had no idea Herb was a predator. Julie and the kids were gone a lot, and Herb seemed to have been able to control his murderous ways until they were out of town. Julie provided the investigators with the dates of when she and the kids were at the lake house, sometimes for several months at a time during the summer. These dates coincided with when the man had disappeared.
Only a few days after the search for remains had begun, police had enough evidence to arrest Herb.
Finally,
They went back to the lake house, but Herb was gone. Herb's brother Brad contacted the police after seeing a news report with the shocking discovery of what investigators had found at his older brother's home. He told the police that Herb had called him from Fenville, Michigan, and told him that he was on a business trip and needed money quickly. Brad sent him money and only later learned of the discovery of bones at his brother's property. On June 30th, a BOLA was issued. Herb had left the U.S., though, and crossed the border into Canada. Canada didn't require passports from U.S. citizens until 2009, so Herb was able to easily cross the border. On July 2nd, a Canadian trooper stopped Herb, who was sleeping in his car under a bridge. Herb told the officer that he was a tourist passing through and was just trying to get a little sleep before he was on his way. The officer noticed luggage and what appeared to be a box of videotapes in the back seat. He told Herb he needed to move and left. The next day, Herb drove to Pioneer Provincial Park, a large park with over 6,000 acres in Grand Bend, Ontario. Herb wrote a rambling 3-page suicide note where he mentioned remorse over the breakup of his marriage and apologized for the financial issues he was having due to his failing business. The last paragraph was directed to his 3 kids, where he said he was going to eat a peanut butter sandwich and go to sleep. There was zero mention of the horrific crimes he committed or the massive excavation that was happening at his property. Herb shot himself with a .357 Magnum revolver. His body was found in his car 2 days later. There were no videotapes in the vehicle. Maybe he threw them in the large lake before committing suicide. No one knows.
I mean, we might as well add littering to his list of crimes. It's not like he's shown any regard for anyone besides himself before now.
That's true.
By September 12th, the forensic team identified the remains of 4 individuals: Stephen Hale, 26, Roger Allen Goodlett, 33, and Richard Hamilton, 20, all from Indianapolis, and Manuel Resendez, 31, of Lafayette, Indiana. Unfortunately, many of the disappearances fell through the cracks. They were men who visited gay bars and were considered to live a high risk lifestyle. Over the next 2 years, investigators pieced together the extent of Herb's crimes. Forensic investigators found more DNA profiles among the remains that helped to identify 4 more victims: Johnny Bayer, 20, Jeff Allen Jones, 31, Alan Wayne Broussard, 28, and Michael Kieran, 46, all of Indianapolis. Investigators believe that Herb killed at least 25 people. Virgil, always able to look at the big picture, wondered if the murders of 9 gay men who were strangled and whose remains were found in streams and canals in rural areas of western and central Ohio near I-70 could also have been committed by Herb. The victim profiles and cause of death mirrored the findings on Fox Hollow Farm. Virgil relayed Mark's harrowing story to Preble County, Ohio prosecutor David Lindloff, who was heading up the investigation of the I-70 murders. The murders spanned a little over a decade, beginning in 1980, and the last known victim was found in 1991. Investigators in both Indiana and Ohio worked together to determine if the cases were connected. Herb had been seen in western Ohio around the time the I-70 Strangler murders took place. Julie, numb but open to the possibility that Herb's crimes span beyond the grounds of her home, provided attorney Lindlof with a mountain of evidence. She provided dates of Herb's various business trips that took him along the I 70, along with credit card receipts, phone records, and she even allowed investigators to search the car Herb had used during those trips. Herb's photo matched the police sketch, which is pretty amazing in itself since the sketch and photo are often dissimilar. After seeing a news story, a friend of one of the victims, Michael Riley, came forward. They recognized the photo of Herb as being the man they saw Michael leave the Vogue Theater with in 1983.
The identified victims were between the ages of 15 and 32. Their bodies were found in 3 Indiana and 2 Ohio counties, Indiana's Hancock, Hamilton, and Shelby counties, along with Ohio's Darke and Preble counties. Investigators began comparing notes about the bodies, and investigators concluded that there were enough similarities to link the murders to Herb. The I 70 murders were believed to have stopped once Herb purchased Fox Hollow Farm. The known victims, all found near the I 70 corridor, were Michael Petrie, 15, Maurice Taylor, 22, Michael Riley, 22, James Robbins, 21, Thomas Clevenger Jr., 19, Eric Rautiger, 17, Michael Glenn, 29, Stephen Elliott, 26, and Clay Boatman, 32. Wanting to tie up all loose ends, in 1998, Ohio and Indiana held a joint press conference to definitively link Herb to the I 70 murders. By the late 1990s, the continued excavation of the Baumeister property subsided. However, in 2022, the Hamilton County Coroner's Office, the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department's Missing Persons Unit, the Indiana State Police, and the University of Indianapolis renewed their investigation. On December 4th, 2022, a team of 11 cadaver dogs searched the Fox Hollow Farm property and discovered more bones and several locations for further investigation. In 2023, the FBI analyzed thousands of bone fragments believed to be from at least 25 individuals to identify other victims. Jeff Jellison, Hamilton County coroner, asked family members of men who went missing during the 1980s and 90s to submit DNA samples to help with identification. Jeff's mission is to review the evidence anew and get as many people identified as possible.
Eric Prenger was one of the first family members to answer the call and submit his DNA. Eric told the Indy Star that he submitted his DNA because he suspected his cousin, Alan Livingston, could have been one of Herb's victims. Eric was only 6 years old and did not know his cousin well when he disappeared. But there was a rush because Alan's mother, Sharon, had terminal cancer and deserved to know what happened to her son. Through forensic genetic genealogy testing, a DNA swab sample of Alan's mother was matched to the remains. Alan was reported missing in August 1993 and disappeared the same day as Manuel Resendez, whose remains were also found on Herb's property. The original investigation had identified 8 victims. Alan was now the 9th. In April of this year, Daniel Thomas Halloran was the 10th person to be identified. Daniel was born in 1972, but the dates of his disappearance and death are unknown. Daniel's identity was somewhat of a shock to investigators as he hadn't been on anyone's radar. Daniel had no living siblings or parents. His mother had died of an overdose, and the coroner's office had a DNA card for her. Through advanced forensic testing and genetic genealogy, they were able to compare the DNA from the remains found on Baumeister's property to the DNA card and identify Daniel. The advancement of forensic science is making possible what in the past would have been impossible. Jeff said they have 3 unidentified DNA profiles with no matches, so those remains remain a mystery. Undeterred and determined, Jeff finds it unacceptable that the remains of victims found on Herb's property have been languishing in the coroner's office for almost 30 years, and it is his mission to identify these victims. With information gathered from several law enforcement agencies and help from the University of Indianapolis Archaeology and Forensic Lab, he is hopeful that more remains will be identified. Considering that nearly 10,000 bone fragments were found at Fox Hollow Farm, Jeff put another call out in 2025 to families that had male relatives go missing in the late 80s to mid 90s to provide DNA samples.
So far, more than 30 families have provided DNA samples, and Jeff is hopeful other families will submit additional samples. My skepticism makes me wonder if some families of missing men don't want to provide DNA because they don't want their loved ones to be found and outed as gay. The news regarding Herb and his victims have been vocal regarding the victim's sexual orientation, and I wonder for some people if the confirmation that their missing relative was a victim is too much to bear in a conservative area where for some being gay is still just kind of amazing, looked at as an abomination.
I wouldn't be surprised.
It's sad but true. In 2007, Robert Graves purchased Foxhall Farm, and though he doesn't actively search the property for bones, he does still find them. Robert knows that a lot of families don't have answers regarding their missing loved ones, so he does what he can, taking the remains to the university. As for Julie and her three children, we couldn't find out where they are now, but didn't look too hard because they deserve whatever peace they have hopefully found. Julie and the kids moved into a house in Indianapolis shortly after the gruesome discovery at their family home, and we hope they are doing well.
Uh-huh.
And because I like to spend hours on the internet, I stumbled across a Reddit thread regarding wives of serial killers and what they did or didn't know. And every case is different, and I do believe that some wives choose not to look too deeply at accumulating red flags. But just because it is a day ending in Y doesn't mean we can blame a woman for the sick deeds of her husband. Being weird, having questionable behavior doesn't make someone a murderer.
It's true. There are absolutely women who willfully ignored or actively participated in their partner's depraved crimes. But there are also some women who had no idea. Murderers can be shock convincing liars. If we were able to identify someone as a serial killer from one interaction, they'd all be in prison before they could earn that pathetic title.
That is so true. Herb was a horrific serial killer who preyed on men who the majority of society didn't care about. The victims were viewed as reckless, living an abnormal lifestyle. Concern about their welfare was never a high priority. I would like to think Herb's ability to fly under the radar would not happen today. I do wonder why there is more information or interest in killers like Jeffrey Dahmer or John Wayne Gacy. I mean, maybe because those cases went to trial and answers to at least some questions were answered. Herb took any potential for answers to his grave with nary a mention of his crimes in his suicide note.
I 100% think the lack of a trial played a role. If more details had come out about his motivation, I have no doubt that the case would be even bigger. Because people love the macabre, Fox Hollow Farm has become a dark tourist attraction for people interested in true crime and hauntings. And many claim to have had paranormal experiences there. There is even a paranormal documentary and a Ghost Adventures episode.
Because of course there is.
It would be a missed opportunity if there wasn't, dedicated to the property. If this is your cup of tea, how about it? Next time, we'll be taking a break from serial killers who targeted gay men in the 90s for a Christmas themed episode where we discuss the case of Zizelle Preston and Stephanie Kilhefner.
All the sources we used for this episode are in the show notes below. If you'd like to suggest a case or theme for us to discuss, you can email us at terrifyinglytypicalpodcast@gmail.com. You can also follow us at Terrifyingly Typical Podcast on Instagram and at Terrifyingly Typical Pod on TikTok. Feel free to leave us a comment, rating, or review to let us know what you think. We'd love to hear your opinions.
See you next time.